So standing here on the edge of this hill, I have to bring in one of my favourite characters, Giovanni Battista Viotti. In 1792, he wrote a little essay about taking a walk in the French Alps. And it's one of the first great moments we have of a musician describing being in the countryside. And he described walking down paths he didn't know and getting lost in a valley he didn't recognize. And he described a valley of incredible beauty with flowers and plants, and he described absolute perfect harmony. And so he abandoned himself to a reverie and sat down on a rock to gather his thoughts. And he described that his emotions stood completely still. He described his heart standing free from passion. But while he was sitting there, he heard the sounds coming from the other side of the valley. Exquisite music, he didn't know what it was. So he walked across the valley to try and find out where it was coming from. He said, after pulling himself together and shedding a few tears. So he walked across the valley and he said the sounds came from a sort of long trumpet, and a woman's voice was blending with a long trumpet in exquisite unison. So he decided he would engrave the music, this is his words, engrave the music on his heart, commit it to memory so he would never forget the combination of music and landscape. And he said to the reader, this is what I'm communicating to you. And then he talked to the question of being natural. He said that the way that the music worked in the landscape, going from hill to hill without any echo, was such that if he wrote it down with bar lines, with measure it would be in French, then it would be denatured, it would lose everything that made it special. And he said this is why he wrote it down without bar lines, without measure. And this is what I'm communicating to you here. And then he finishes the bit of writing by saying, I only play this in places with the best of my friends, and it behoves that the reader's imagination carry you and the music to the Alps where I first heard it. And he said, the best of my friends have heard it. And what he heard was a Ranz de Vaches, a cow call, and I think it's just perfect to bring to here. Music heard in the countryside, transcribed in the countryside, which only really makes sense outside. So this is Giovanni Battista Viotti, writing in 1792.
Earlier in the day, Peter and I had a conversation about these trees. And it was a little bit windier earlier, and the trees were swaying a little bit in the wind, as they always do. And we noticed that they didn't sway in any kind of unison or harmony, but that the big, thick trees would sway slowly, and the little, thinner ones would have a different pulse to their movement. And when you look at 3 or 4 trees doing that, you can more or less follow what's going on. But then when it happens with hundreds of trees, all you really see is what I've called a counterpoint, a pine tree counterpoint, a really complex array of movements. And we thought about this in musical terms. We've been thinking a lot today about music in the landscape. And I couldn't help feeling that there was a kind of visual music in watching the swaying of these trees and finding, well, a resonance between that visual impact and the way, for example, a musical instrument works, or the way music itself works. And so I did what I often do in those circumstances. I started to scribble a few words. And these are literally just scribbled words, which may one day find their way into a poem or a piece of prose, or they may just stay in my notebook forever and never be used. And they're just really a collection of words, really, but they try to do justice to that concept of there being a kind of a great music happening in the landscape. Pine tree counterpoint. Time and meter measured on the dendro scale. Strings of an earth harp vibrating, resonating, G sharp. Resinating, rosinating. An octave leap to the next wind-plucked tree. The harmonics and the interference pitches as the trees vibrate, the strings vibrate, their differing frequencies according to their gauge. Their music is beyond hearing, rooted in the earth, the tonic.